Well, hello and welcome to the Photo Brigade podcast. I'm Robert Caplin. Today I have Edwin Torres on the podcast. How you doing, Edwin?
Good. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Edwin is a great documentary photographer based here in New York. You've kind of made your way as a freelancer. Now you actually are a staffer at the New York City Mayoral Office, following around our fine mayor, Bill de Blasio.
Yep, that's correct.
That's correct. That's the scoop. And you also are from the South Bronx, and you have this beautiful, essay that you've been working on continuously about the area that we're going to dive into here shortly. And
Yeah. I mean, a little bit about myself. I grew up in the South Bronx in the Hunts Point section, kind of moved around to different neighborhoods for some time. And when I went away to college, I told my film studies professor, I was really into cinema and dissecting and writing about films. I told him I wanted to get into filmmaking, and he told me take a film photography class, and so I did some medium format portraiture for like two or three years while I was in college. And when I returned back to the Bronx, I kind of just saw like a lot of beauty in the everyday life.
Your whole like visual, your palette changed, and you just saw all this after.
Completely. And so at first I was a street photographer shooting mostly 35 millimeter black and white film photographs.
I'm going to go ahead and go through
Bronx.
some of this South Bronx stuff as we're going here. But these are some of the pictures. And also, before we get started, I just want to say thanks to Adorama, as usual, for letting us use their event space. It's Canon Professional Services and Temba Bags for all of your support. You guys rock. Please subscribe to our podcast and hit the get notifications off of this so that you can see our future podcasts as they go live. Back to Edwin. Sorry. So some of your South Bronx work. Go ahead and continue.
So I've called this the Tribute to the South Bronx series. I've been doing this pretty much since I graduated from college. It's been like my photo project to just go out and shoot between assignments throughout the development of my professional career. Just fun, not so personal work.
And are you shooting digitally? Are you shooting black and white? And this is a series, obviously.
Most of this work is black and white film because I enjoy the process. I have been a volunteer and a member at the Bronx Documentary Center for several years now, and they have a great darkroom that I use. I like to go there and develop my film and look at contact sheets. The reason I shoot film is because of the contact sheets. I mean, you can shoot, but I think you see the bigger picture in the contact sheet.
Sure.
You see the ones that pop out, the ones that stand, the ones that are a little bit weird for a second.
Yeah.
And when you select them, you eventually get a nice collection of images that are somewhat meaningful.
Nice. And so, a little bit of background. You went to college, right? You went to college for this. Where was it? It was Colby College, you said?
Colby College.
College, which is where?
It's in Waterville, Maine.
Waterville, Maine.
7 hours away from the Bronx.
Yeah. Was it kind of like a culture shock going? I mean, it's almost like you came back and saw where you lived in a different light, right?
Yeah.
And was it kind of like almost a culture shock coming back, or was it a culture shock going to Maine? Like, what's your?
Well, I mean, when I was in high school, I really wanted to leave the Bronx. I honestly wasn't the biggest fan of it because growing up all the time, the only thing I would see in the media was, crime and all the negative things. I wanted to get away as quickly as possible when I was a senior in high school. So I decided to go to Colby for their program, obviously. They were a really good school, but also I figured the distance would help me grow. It was a huge culture shock. Like, I went to a high school that was 98% Hispanic and black, All Hallows High School in the Bronx. It was an all-boys Catholic school. And Colby was, I think, 90%, white, Caucasian.
Sure.
So it was interesting, to say the least. But my time at Colby really formed my way of thinking. Like, the education program there was just really good. I was an American Studies major, to be specific, which, as a journalist, as a storyteller, outside of a photo degree, really helped inform my context and knowledge of history, literature, cinema, the different waves of feminism, the different periods in American history that have come to define us today. And we've also taken a look at pop culture and how it shapes American identity. So a lot of it informs my storytelling after I graduated.
So when you came back here and then started this project on, the area where you grew up, did you have any, Did you have any idea of what it would become, or what any plans for it? Because most recently I saw the New York City Mayor's Office shared a feature on you and what you've been doing in the South Bronx, which was really cool. I mean, we shared it on our feed as well. But did you have an idea that someday you would publish it in such a way, or it was just like, let's just document and see where it goes?
I had no idea that it would be what it is today. I mean, at that time when I just graduated, I really didn't know what documentary photography was. I was just taking photographs in the South Bronx, and I liked shooting film.
Uh-huh.
And it slowly over the years started to become more focused on street portraits and moments that are very iconic of the Bronx. You know, I make this work for Bronxites, for people to see it and be like, yeah, that's home, you know? And these photographs are about like a sense of compassion on the streets, you know, despite economic hardship, despite, you know, like homicide rates and crime and kind of like just the struggle. You know, there's kind of like these tender moments in the South Bronx.
And when you're going around, do you just always have a camera around your neck when you're going home and just take snaps along the way? Are you following these certain, like when you're walking by, for instance, this scene, are you just happen to be walking by someone's window and something's going on, you just bump in and take a few shots, or do you make yourself known?
You know, I started that way, but eventually I realized that I needed to really dedicate a lot of time to, you know, going out to shoot. So I made it more of a purpose, to more of a statement to, I'm going to spend today shooting 8 hours. I come back home, I get 1 or 2 pictures. That's fine. But, you know, some days I'd meet people and I'd hang out with them. You need to be very patient and slow thinking in these long-term projects.
Right. Well, that, you know, that's awesome. So, do you have any plans for this project to go anywhere in the future beyond what's been done now online and in your galleries and so on?
In the fall, around October, I'm going to have a solo exhibition at the Bronx Music Heritage Center.
Oh, nice.
I'm going to continue shooting for it. I'm going to make some nice darkroom prints for the exhibition. And eventually, I'd like to make a book, but I'm not in a particular rush to put the book together, you know. The book, I kind of just want to make it for myself and, you know, other Bronxites that want these timeless pictures.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was shooting this black and white street stuff for, you know, for like the past 4 or 5 years, since 2012. I graduated college in 2012, when I found the Bronx Documentary Center. And I bring the Bronx Documentary Center up now because of these series of photographs we're about to show you. The center was a really instrumental place in shaping my thinking as a documentary photographer. I was walking down the street shooting black and white street photographs, and I saw there was an exhibition about the South Bronx in the 70s or 80s.
Yep.
Photographers like David Gonzalez, Angel Franco, Joe Conzo, Ricky Flores, a lot of Puerto Rican photographers from the South Bronx who grew up there, lived there, and documented the Bronx. And the Bronx Documentary Center kind of told me about storytelling. And so these series of photographs here are about a young man that I met who was in the Latin Kings. When I was a junior in college, I met him, and he asked me to take photos of him and his family. And he was leaving the gang. That's when I met him.
Is he firing off a gun?
He's firing off a gun July 4th. It was my junior year in college. My sister, I went to meet my sister for a long time. I hadn't seen her in a while, and she was at a house party, and I went to the house party, and it was super sketch. It was like, all right, there's a Latin King house party. They're all wearing their beads, and Gotti, his name was Gotti, was one of them. And he was like, yo, what are you doing with a camera? You know, and I was like, taking pictures of the kids. I showed him one of the photos of the kids, and he was like, oh man, you're a good photographer. So he pulls me up to the roof, grabs his friend, and he's like, come with us. These guys take me up to the roof, and they have these bags on them, and they take out these guns out of these bags. I'm like, these guys are gonna kill me.
Oh God.
But instead they start posing with the guns, and they ask me to take photographs of them,
man.
you know, and then they fire a few rounds into the air, and that's when I took that picture. So I stopped talking to him for a while when I went back to college, you know, and I sent them the pictures. I was like, all right, I'm safe. But then after I graduated, you know, he reached out and told me he had a daughter, and that he left the gang, and he was having some issues, and that he wanted me to come and photograph her her first birthday, his daughter's first birthday.
Mm-hmm.
And so I saw him. He was completely transformed. This is another series. I saw him. He was completely transformed. And so I spent the next 7 months with him, learning documentary photography and doing it.
So this was all a project through the Bronx documentary?
No, this was a self-initiative project. Like, I showed David Gonzalez an initial edit of these photographs.
For the Times,
yeah.
Lens blog.
And he told me, you need to work harder at it, and you need to tell his story. And this is a story. Most people would have done a story about gang life. I see the story as the transition from gang life to fatherhood. So that's the moment that I realized that my perspective is important in what I do, because I know that for Puerto Ricans, family is everything.
Mm-hmm.
So that eventually led me to my next big project, which was photographing my own family in the South Bronx, the Puerto Rican diaspora. And I came upon this project after I took a workshop with Maggie Stieber. These next series of photos. I took a workshop with Maggie Stieber, who, for a long time photographed her mother.
We were just talking about Maggie Stieber in the last podcast with Richard Patterson, who worked under her at the Miami Herald. So we were just like raving about her, as a matter of fact.
That's great. Yeah, she taught me the importance of getting close to home as much as possible. And that at the end of the day, that's the work that's going to stand out. It may not be the work that you can sell to a newspaper or, any company in particular, but you make these photographs for yourself. You make these photographs to find yourself as a person and build yourself.
Right.
So
super cool. So this is your family.
Yeah, this is my family. We're originally from Puerto Rico. My family came to the Bronx in the 70s and 80s. And through that time, I have photographed, my grandmother, my mother. My grandmother suffers from Alzheimer's and diabetes, and she recently passed away. My grandfather was he sold products like avocados and stuff in Puerto Rico. That's my family, one of the rivers in Puerto Rico.
Very cool.
Part of the project I originally started in the Bronx, and I told myself I was going to return back to the small town in Puerto Rico that my family's from, to kind of tell their story and, just dig in deep with where my family's from, which is a small town in Puerto Rico. It's 2,500 people, and is going through hard times with what's happening with the economy. And,
yeah, exactly. Getting blown up there, aren't you? Okay, so you're continuing to do this personal work, obviously, and it's all black and white. What are you shooting with, by the way, when you're shooting these black and white film?
Mostly Triax film, 35 millimeter Triax film. Try to keep it simple.
What kind of gear?
I'm a big fan of Leica film cameras.
So you have a Leica.
They're great. Yeah.
Nice, very discreet and so on. Well, that's amazing. So continuing to do projects on your family. How's your family reacted to all this?
My family's good. We're, for them, it's kind of been like an honor. Like, I've shown them the photographs at like exhibitions and slideshows, and they're like, wow, we're having our story told, and it's empowering. If you go back one, this is my father. Mm-hmm. My dad is, he grew up in Puerto Rico, and was, when we came to New York, he didn't have a formal education. He worked as a garbage truck driver for many years, and he drank a lot, growing up. And, recently that caught up with him, and he had a bypass. He had to get a bypass surgery because of heart problems. Mm-hmm. So this was the day after his recovery.
Oh, wow.
This is my grandmother who passed away. She had Alzheimer's, and, in my family there's a lot of caretaking.
Sure.
So we brought her in towards the last few years of her life, and, we try to help her out as much as possible. This was my sister putting on a bib on my grandmother in the elevator, coming back from going on our way to a family barbecue. And I think this photograph ran in like my first New York Times Lens blog piece that was like Turning Point. I was talking about.
Oh, the Turning Point, yeah.
Yeah, the Turning Point
I did that,
series.
yeah. I did one of those as well. So this was your turning point, you'd say?
Yep.
Documenting your family.
Yeah, correct.
Cool. New York Times Lens blog. I'm sure most people that are watching know about it, but it's a wonderful outlet for photographers to get their work seen by a vast audience. Ran by Jim Estrin and David Gonzalez, who are just amazing people, photographers and editors, and mentors.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know about you, but Estrin to me was a mentor. I interned at the Times a dozen years ago now, which is crazy.
Wow.
That's insane to me. It's been at 2005, and he would sit down with me and hang out and just talk about photography. And this was way before the Lens blog and everything. So, and it looks like we've started a new project. This is a portrait
of my. No, it's the same project. This is a portrait of my sister. This was when she was in the Rough Rider Clubhouse in the South Bronx in Hunts Point. She's always been like this, tough South Bronx girl.
With the Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, with the Winnie the Pooh tattoo. That's my sister Zali.
Awesome.
And that's my aunt. She's a salsa queen. She dances at parties even though she's in a wheelchair. She hurt her back at an early age.
Oh, that's cool.
That's my niece's communion.
Wow, so this is like a real in-depth story that you've been putting together. Are you continuing this story?
Yes, I am.
Ended?
No, it's always ongoing, and this is one of the stories I shoot for myself, kind of like just to document all of the happy and tragic moments in my family. Like this was on the morning of my grandmother's funeral, and that's my grandfather, and my brother's helping him get dressed for the funeral, and he's on a wheelchair because he lost his foot to gangrene. For working so many years as, selling vegetables and produce in the farmer's market in Puerto Rico.
Wow. Goodness gracious. People have, you look at how lucky we are in most of our generation, the things that we often take for granted, and folks that were in our grandparents' generation, work was a much bigger thing. We're making a living now as photographers, and how lucky we are that we aren't out there slaving away, working fields and so on.
Yeah. That's a portrait of my grandfather shortly after the other photo.
It's a lot of emotion in that photo. Oh,
and
goodness.
That's during the funeral.
Was it hard for you documenting this? Recently we had Nancy Borowick on, who documented her family's fight with cancer, which ended, unfortunately, her mother and father, and she also documented all these really hard moments. Was it difficult for you to do this? Did you use your camera sort of as a
shield?
As a shield for this, emotional boundary,
It was that photo. I remember crying when I was looking through the viewfinder. But I thought it was incredibly important for me to do, because if I didn't do it, no one else was going to do it. So, I see the camera as a barrier, but I also see it as a more active listener in the family, because it's very easy to, it's a different form of thinking,
And so you've been continuing, you look back on family albums.
Other families, like now.
This is other
so
families.
My family, my grandmother had Alzheimer's. Now my aunts are coming down with Alzheimer's. So this is a portrait of my grandmother and her sisters, the original matriarchy, the tree, and when my grandmother passed away, a lot of the imbalance started to happen, and the sisters started to also get Alzheimer's. So that's my other aunt who currently has Alzheimer's, and I visit her frequently in Puerto Rico. Every time I go, even if we're just like sitting at home for 3 or 4 hours in the front porch, it's important that they're not alone.
Is it how do they react to your camera? They've just gotten used to it? Did you have to have
it's just a part of Edwin now.
It is now. Yeah, sort of the same with my family, in a way. But although I don't know how my family would react to wanting to take these types of photos, but it has to. It's hard. It's a hard thing to do. In any situation, even if it's not your family, to sort of build that trust and knowing that that's going to be an image that lives on forever and tells the story of your family.
Yeah.
And educates people, about Alzheimer's and so on as well.
Exactly. Yeah, it was some of the hardest work. This work right here was, I guess, from one of my first real assignments. I was shooting New York Times assignments, but an assignment that paid me to go somewhere to stay there for a week and work almost as like a correspondent. Almost.
Oh, wow.
So this was the Baltimore Riots. Freddie Gray, when
Right.
Freddie Gray was killed.
Is it a series?
The protest that's erupted, and I was at home editing pictures when I got a call from my editor at the Daily Mail, I think it was, and
Oh, okay.
she's like, "What are you doing? Can you hop on a train and just like run over?" You know, and I did just that, and I got in, and I, you know, in that time, I kind of stood away from all the news situations. I got some of it, but I kind of like started to just talk to people on the outskirts of what was also happening.
There's plenty
get in
of
their
people telling
homes.
the hard news and showing that stuff. But
Exactly. And so this picture of this young man here, you know, he was kind of speaking to the gun violence and a shootout that had happened when police mistook his house for a person who shot a gun and ran in. And so police had fired into his home, and he was showing me the area where bullets came into his house. And he was shot 3 times and taken to the hospital, and he survived that, obviously. But he was kind of just telling me about the overall relationship between the police and the community.
Yikes. That doesn't seem very good.
But Baltimore, I mean, it was like, you look at the outskirts. This was also in the outskirts, you know, like it was an occupation. It was like it was something else to see, you know, a lot of military artillery deployed in an American city.
Yeah, I mean, and also the state of the outskirts.
The actual
that's
conditions.
America.
Like, wow,
you know?
that's America. Yeah,
Right.
Baltimore is messed up.
Right.
You know?
And then telling the story of the media too, which, you know, people, when they see the photos the media make, but not necessarily.
Yeah, this picture went viral, got a ton of retweets when I posted it on Twitter, and I posted, you know, like, this is the press pin. This is what the media sees, you know. And
everyone's
so, like,
getting sort of this. How did you get a different shot?
I took the risk and I ran out of the pack, and you know,
Did they end up putting you back in after you took this photo, or did you just?
I kind of just went with the protesters because I felt like if I would have gotten back in, I would have gotten in trouble or something.
Right.
You know, I kind of just I left. This was my like departure from the pack. I was like, all right, I'm leaving. Turn around, take a picture.
Yeah, and you notice how there's a lot of photographers, a handful that have helmets on, and I remember, I don't know if it was this particular instance, Lucas from Reuters had said, you know, don't just go in there willy-nilly. There's some danger with what's going on. You know, did you have like protective gear? Did you like what was your feeling? Did you feel unsafe? I mean, obviously you've been on the top of buildings with people firing guns.
But the first night I got to Baltimore, it was like 10:30. You know, I got into a car with my photo editor friends. Nico was there. John Taggart was in the car. Tags was in the car. And I'm sitting next to him, and I still remember that day. I'm like looking at him, and he's pulling out a helmet, a gas mask, like all this equipment, and I'm like, I have nothing.
Yeah.
All right, let's go. I'm ready to do this.
Right.
Eventually, I met like what changed my perspective from the other press photographers is I ended up staying with a local journalist who did more radio and podcast stuff.
Oh, okay.
And he was covering it from that angle.
Sure.
So I stood with him in his house, and he had extra stuff that he lent me.
Oh, that's good. That's
so
good.
These images are just images from my New York Times portfolio, stuff I had shot on assignment. These were the Brujas, which is a Bronx female skate group that's like you know, they're called it's the witches in Spanish, the Brujas. And it's just a badass crew of girls that, you know, tear up the Bronx skate parks and
do you speak
parts
Spanish?
over Manhattan. Yeah, I do.
Okay. And you find that very helpful working in New York City, especially in the position that you are now as a mayoral photographer? You find yourself...
I do. I think you know, diversity in the newsroom, the photo room, whatever you want to call it, is incredibly important. Speaking Spanish is a great way to like instantly connect with whatever community, you know, is Spanish speaking, just as any other language.
And you're taking pictures of homeless, which is...
This was a big story I worked on. These homeless pictures are a story I worked on with the Times.
Is this part of it?
Yeah, there's a ton of like, it's all over the place.
Okay.
But I shot a cover story with the Times on the state of homelessness in 2015. Those were some of the more popular pictures. These are just some LGBTQ portraits. This is some stuff on Staten Island. I also did a lot of real estate stuff for the Times. In fact, that's how I originally started at the Times.
So that was what I was going to ask you. How did you get your kind of foot in the door? Because there's all the different sections and the different desks and so on that we, you know, and everyone has their path into the Times. Yeah. So you came in, you didn't intern or anything. Did you go and speak with somebody? How'd that original connection happen?
So I was volunteering at that point for like 2 years at the Bronx Documentary Center, gallery sitting when an email went out a photo editor, real estate editor was looking for new people. You know, Mike Camber recommended 2 or 3 of us. She chose my portfolio. Cecilia Bohan was my editor.
Love Cecilia.
And she put me on a living in assignment, which is to show a portrait of a neighborhood, you know, and what it's like and what it has to offer. So I did that in Pelham Bay in the Bronx, and I just worked my butt off for those, you know, like I photographed the hell out of it.
Right.
You know, I was like, this is my first assignment. It's the biggest deal in the world. Like I worked from, you know, sunrise to sunset in the summer, which is a really long day. And, you know, eventually I just kept working at the Times.
And you got your name on the freelance list. And the reality is when you start submitting your work through their FTP or whatever, everyone sees it. That's an editor. That's going into their system, and it's just like a constant feed. Obviously, editors are looking for their stuff, but the Metro editor, the director of photography, Michelle, and so on, are seeing everything come through. So they're taking note of beautiful photos. And so when they see a buttload of beautiful images come through and someone working their butt off on a shoot that may or may not be, you know, a glamour shoot, you know what I mean? It's real estate, which is now I will say that real estate section has been getting much better in the past 5-10 years for sure, because there's stories, they're really displaying things well, and they've got the likes of you working on it.
I'd like to say I kind of like, at that time I set the standard for what living in photo series should be. I was doing a lot of them, and I was working my butt off on a lot of them, and I don't know, that's just the way I see it. But eventually, like, I kept working.
You raised the bar for everyone else.
And I was like, I want to get on the New York desk. I want to do local stuff. Like, put me on local stuff. So I went to the New York region desk and the Metro desk.
The Metro desk.
Yeah. And I was like, come on, put me on something. Give me a try.
And how did you do that? You went into the building and just went over and said hello. You made emails and asked to meet.
I think frequent stops are important. You need to show your face to stand out in the industry. I think that the more you can stop by your editor's desk, even if it's, you know, to say hi to a few editors, do that every 1 or 2 months is nice. You know, they see a face outside of the pictures.
And what was this story that we're looking at now? It seems like a lot of police action.
So after a year of shooting as a freelancer for the Times, doing a variety of assignments, you know, they kind of knew me as the guy from the Bronx to call. So it was kind of nice to be like the Bronx freelancer correspondent almost. And so the Times started working in 2016 on a year-long series of, you know, homicide investigation stories. So it was called The Murder in the 4-0. Right? Yeah, just the last story just ran.
Yeah.
So essentially, you know, the 40th precinct, which is where I live, also happens to be one of the precincts in New York City with the second highest number of homicides outside of East New York. But it also happens to be one of the precincts in one of the areas in the South Bronx that people talk about gentrification and change. So I thought it was really interesting, you know, and to do these breaking news stories and pay tribute to the lives of people and cover it. You know, they were allocating like 8 or 9 reporters and photographers to these stories, more even. And we'd follow a story for a month, 2 months. You know, I mean, some of the stories didn't run for 3 months after it happened. So it was nice to kind of like really dig into the details on how some of these homicides happened, because the reality is, you know, people just treat breaking news as breaking news, and they only cover, you know, a few words, and that's it. Yeah.
And so you obviously for a year or so went into these.
I was living with a police scanner in my apartment.
Do the police know who you are now? Like
they knew who I was. They knew I was the New York Times guy. Oftentimes I was the first one to get there. I had a bike. You know, it was my hood. It was my neighborhood. I lived on 153rd and Melrose. This was happening in the 40th precinct, which is everything from 138th Street to 161 Yankee Stadium area. And you know, it was a long, dark year, but also a very exciting. And you know, I kind of like, at first I kind of like lived for the adrenaline, and over time I kind of was like, no, not another one. Because when you're covering your own community, it becomes very difficult. Once you start to stomach that. And you know, this photograph here is from when a mother, Jessica White, was killed, and the neighborhood knew who did it, but they wouldn't speak up about it.
Oh, man.
She was killed in front of her kids in a park by a stray bullet meant for another gang member.
Jeez.
And so the cops are looking, for pieces of bullet casings behind the railing.
Did you at all feel awkward about being part of this and having your name attached and so on? I mean, I don't know. I'm just curious.
Yeah. I thought that I know there's the conception that, breaking news photography isn't necessarily the community type work. It's like it kind of just goes along with the bad representations of the Bronx and stuff like that. Well, I think that the reality is that there's good and bad in the Bronx, and this is a part of that reality.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, while I was doing this body of work, I was getting much better at my South Bronx tribute photographs, the black and white ones I showed earlier, way better. I was getting much more closer and intimate and showing much more like positive, close moments. And so in a way, taking those black and white photos, I remember these days. It was the summer. I'd literally drive my bike, like ride my bike around with like a Nikon with a 24-70 and a film mic on my back. Like I'd hang out every day. As the beautiful thing about being a freelancer, so I was out there, and so I'd be making pictures for myself, and then some shit would go. Sorry, I can't.
It's okay.
Something would go down. Something would go down, and I would have to like run there and and respond to it. And covering the crime scene is the easiest piece of it. I mean, the hardest part was following up, and going to the funeral, and after you've made a connection with the family. And they said, yes, you can photograph at their funeral, going to the burial and the wake and, and seeing those final moments of goodbye and, seeing his boys throwing whiskey into the casket, you know, and the mom crying. And the hardest part is following up with them 2 weeks after the news, all the other outlets have forgotten. Right. And a mother's still in tears because she just lost her daughter and, her kids are motherless. Yeah.
It's a terrible situation.
Yeah, it was.
But I think that you did a really poignant job documenting this and in a way that's not so in your face, or I don't know. There's something about your work and how you do document things. It feels so very street.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I was doing this a lot with Angel Franco, and so
he's so great. He's one of the best, isn't he?
Yeah, we were working on the job together.
He's a former staff photographer.
Yes, correct.
He's just recently retired after 40 years,
something like
that. I don't know how old you are, Angel. Sorry if I overestimated.
This is a photo essay I did on synthetic marijuana and K2, the rise of K2.
Oh, right, yeah.
In the same area where I live, the 40th precinct. 3rd Avenue, 149th Street. I had photographed it for a year. I did some commissions for Vice on the topic as well. I was just fascinated that I'm living in my neighborhood and here are these bodegas selling this synthetic weed behind the counters.
I didn't even realize that this was a thing.
And it's for $5 or $10 and people are like smoking blunts of it on the block and, it's kind of like normal, and people are slumping over. This was like 2 or 3 years back, mind you.
Right. Have they been outlawed since then, or this type of stuff?
It has. It's gone through like different phases. They've been taken off store shelves. This city is taking a lot of action to kind of cut back on it. I ended up following this one guy in particular for 4 or 5 months from Puerto Rico, Carlos Santiago. He was staying at a shelter. He was making these art wire sculptures and selling them in the street, and he would just buy K2 and smoke it. And that was like a cycle.
And how do you, like, the thing that I think is so interesting about your work is you're documenting these people in such a way they're smoking weed or fake weed or soon to be, illegal fake weed. These moments, how do you gain that trust? I mean, obviously, this is the first time we're actually meeting, and you're, very kind. You got kind eyes. You're very welcoming. That part of being a photographer in this field is being a personable person. Yeah. If you've got some sort of like edge to you, and people don't, you have to be a people person. Yeah. But how do you approach people that you think might be part of your documentary?
I mean, when I went into this, I saw Carlos. This is him again, the guy I've profiled for a while. I didn't see him smoking K2, and I wasn't thinking about doing a piece on synthetic marijuana. I kind of saw him making these wire sculptures on the street, and I was like, whoa, that's different. I haven't seen that in the South Bronx at all. I was like, why don't you go down to Union Square and sell it? And I started taking pictures of him, and I went out at like noon that day, and I was with him till like 6 or 7. I was like, yeah, let's go down to Union Square. You know, maybe you'll be able to sell it there. Maybe you'll be able to sell them there. And went down to Union Square. He didn't sell anything.
Oh.
And
Wah.
I felt horrible. But in the course of like my day spent with him, I noticed he was smoking. And when I met up with him next time, he was smoking more. And
you noticed it wasn't cigarettes, and you noticed it.
Right.
And you
had a really distinct smell.
But not like actual weed.
Not like actual weed. It's like fake perfume-esque weed.
Yeah.
It was weird. It was interesting. And a lot of people in my neighborhood were looking like zombies, you know, because of this stuff. So, yeah, that was my time spent on this story. So
you just never know. You just find an interesting person, you get to know them a little bit, and you follow them around and learn more about them, and that's where your stories develop. And that just happens to be
exactly
where it went.
And it helps that, you know, he was Puerto Rican, I was Puerto Rican. I was personally interested in, you know, kind of like what was happening and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's the other picture, you may not see this picture here. There's a guy passed out in front of the steps of a hospital.
Oh man.
Who was smoking K2. This was in Brooklyn. This is part of the piece I did for Vice. But
So freelancing, and this is all before you started working in the mayor's office?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Correct.
And
this is from the ProPublica nuisance abatement story that won the Pulitzer.
Oh wow. Amazing.
There's a bunch of series of photographs here. It was more an investigative story, and I was following this girl. So the Pulitzer Prize, that I was part of a Pulitzer Prize winning team for this story on nuisance abatement with ProPublica. When I had become a fellow, I was assigned to be the primary photographer for this long investigation. The reporter, Sarah Riley, spent a year almost on this story, just collecting data. And the niche of it is the nuisance abatement law is a law that was originally used by the NYPD to call an action against a place. Like, for example, 42nd Street, back then there were brothels. They'd say this place is a nuisance. We need to shut it down. You know, it's the place. You know, it's an action against the place, so they can immediately shut it down. And eventually the NYPD started using it more outside of that area. And, you know, if you had kids or, you know, some of your relatives had minor drug charges or anything against them, you know, this was something that the NYPD was using to evict people out of their homes. But it was completely unfair for the people getting kicked out, because then they would have to bargain back in. They would have to go to trial to get access back to their home. A lot of people would lose their Section 8 housing. A lot of people would, you know, and it was also an action that was being used for bodegas as well. The NYPD would hire, you know, auxiliary police officers to go in and buy underage beers, and if they got the bodega owner, who most times in the Bronx was an immigrant who didn't really know the law as well as they should,
right, because
there's little resources, then the cops would come in, write them a ticket. They got 3 of those. They got alcohol license shut down, and for most bodegas in the Bronx, that's like 60% of their business. So a lot of them had to close. So this was a bodega in Harlem that had to put locks on it, because sometimes auxiliary police officers would also test bodega owners by just going in, grabbing a beer, and walking out.
Right.
Not even stopping at the counter.
Right.
So.
Right. Interesting. And this is a separate portrait series?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me about this portrait series.
This is from the Jerome Avenue Workers Project. I like to consider this one of my favorite photographs I've made. It was shot on medium format using a Hasselblad with a standard 80mm lens. This is a portrait series about the working class amongst Jerome Avenue in the Bronx under the 4 train. Mostly mechanic shops, you know, hair salons, tire shops. And it's an area that is going to be rezoned from commercial to residential, or at the time was going to be rezoned from commercial to residential. And a lot of these people who were immigrants who moved to New York City 20, 30 years ago and had built their businesses are at risk of losing it and facing displacement. So, you know, I did it in conjunction with the Bronx Documentary Center, but these are most of my portraits here in this edit. We made a book called the Jerome Avenue Workers Project.
It's beautiful. I mean, did it make you shoot it differently because you were using this format? Did you look at it a different way? Obviously, we have a square format. You have a much larger camera.
I was, you know, trying to tune in with like the great portrait photographers like August Sanders, Walker Evans. Like, I was really trying to go old school with it, I was like, there's something about the square, something about the focal length, and the simplicity of it all as well was, it's really about them at the end of the day.
And in the process of shooting this film, what do you do with the film? Do you develop it yourself? Do you take it to someplace and have it done?
I'd hand develop at the basement of the Bronx Documentary Center.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's super cool. And they kind of help support that type of process. They have a lab or something down there. Or?
Well, so the Bronx Photo League, which is the group of us that worked on this project, is a product of the Bronx Documentary Center.
Gotcha.
So every Friday, there's like myself, and a few other Bronxites, for the past 4 or 5 years, we have gathered around an informal class on Fridays. Friday nights from like 7 to 9. We'd get together, buy a couple of beers, pull down the slideshow, set up the projector, and critique each other's photographs.
Right.
Or look at new photographs, new work, and talk about it. And eventually, we got into the idea of tackling larger projects within the Bronx, and this is the first one.
Well, that's super cool. I have never been up there, but I've only heard amazing things about the Bronx Documentary Center, and I look forward to checking it out and getting more, hopefully, Photo Brigade more involved in sharing the type of work that you guys, and maybe getting some more of you Bronxites on the podcast talk about your work, because I think any kind of community around photography is important. That's what Photo Brigade's about. It's just developing a community so we can all work and promote each other and what we do. So super cool. And people can go check out the Bronx Documentary Center. Is it just bronxdocumentarycenter.org probably, or something like that?
Bronxdoc.org.
Bronxdoc.org. So I think that everyone should definitely check that out for sure.
Ramona, she's actually a tire shop owner. Mechanic shop owner, and one of the few on Jerome Avenue. That's a woman. And it was just really empowering to be able to photograph her, but also her empowering story for other women.
Yeah.
Kind of like Bella Santiago, the first portrait I had showed, kind of like the role of women in this industry that's mainly for men was an interesting component.
I think that's great. Yeah.
Wasn't expected.
It's wonderful. So you had quite a few portraits you did. Was it hard for you to sort of go through? I mean, I imagine there was more than what you're showing us here. Was it hard to sort of edit through? And is that what you guys do at the documentary center, is look at each other's work and sort of edit things out? And,
oh, yeah.
And what's the process? Like putting it on the walls? Are they prints?
So during our Friday meetings, we would get together, we'd make contact sheets of all the stuff everyone was shooting and put it in a big pile. Mm-hmm. No names on it, nothing, just a pile of contact sheets. With 120 film, and we'd circle whatever looked interesting.
That's cool.
That's
cool.
So it was cool to see other photographers grease pencil circles and stuff, and see what they were looking at.
Right.
So it was a group process in the editing as well. But I kind of went through and I picked out my own pictures too. So.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, it's your podcast, so definitely. Very cool. And so is this around the time that you ended up, we'll look through after we get through this series, we'll look at the Flickr page of the...
Sure.
Is that what's next?
Yes, okay. I believe so.
So we're getting to the end of this slideshow here, and sort of, so tell me about your transition into what you're doing today. Like, how did that come about?
So I was finishing up with the Jerome Avenue Workers Project. I had finished the nuisance abatement piece. I was finishing the New York Times Murder in the 4-0 series. 2016 was a really good year for me.
Yeah, I mean, a very productive year for you, for sure.
And, and I definitely think that just staying close to who you are as a photographer helped pave the way. I was a freelancer who I could have made a lot more money doing it if I had taken other opportunities. But I kind of wanted to only stick to 3 or 4 assignments,
mm-hmm.
And shoot my own personal stuff as well, I think I was finishing up a project for Ground Truth. It was a portrait series in Tulsa. I don't have these on here, but, I was in Tulsa when I got a call from, for an opportunity to work as a staff photographer in City Hall,
mm-hmm.
and I never fancied myself a politics person. I thought our current mayor was pretty cool at the time, and I started thinking about it, and I'm like, here it is, it's knocking on the front door. Like, for me, it's a different experience to be working, for the mayor's office.
Well, not only that, but on a staff.
As a staff photographer, correct. it's like there's a lot of photographers. For me, New York City is my home. It's my stomping ground. This is the place I want to be. I don't really want to go anywhere else, at least not yet. Some photographers want to travel and cover different places. I think New York City has that for me. And so, you know, being a city photographer, I kind of see myself as like the New York documentarian, the city of New York documentarian.
So I'm going to go through as we talk about this, just some of the work that you've done. This is just your
this was yesterday.
page.
No, this was Wednesday at the FDNY Medal Day ceremony. This is stuff off the Flickr page.
So this is literally by date. Probably the latest is at the top of this list. So
correct. Yep.
So we're just kind of going through raw takes, and you basically shoot and put directly onto Flickr for this job.
Correct. We have our own photo archives inside. Part of my job is to photograph the mayor and the first lady. A lot of it is going to parades, you know, meetings, announcements. This was the first lady at a baby shower. You know, a lot of, you know, unfortunately funerals for members who fall in the line of duty. This, you know, FDNY is personal to me because my own brother is a firefighter.
Oh,
so
really? Wow.
There's a kind of like, you know, presence of my family being in the city. And it's something I think about every day, every time I'm covering an FDNY funeral. This was the first lady's graduation. She got a doctorate for public health from CUNY. So she was an honorary recipient of the doctorate. And I try to cover the events as well, and I try to cover them. That shows them in a closer way.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of stuff that's always going on, so it's fun, honestly. Like it's a very exciting job.
It's a neat way to see the city too, from the standpoint of.
This was the renaming of 42nd to Jimmy Breslin Way.
Oh yeah! Wow, that's pretty amazing. I mean, all these different people in the you know, journalistic community and so on. Even Bill Cunningham got his own photographer for the New York Times in the fashion district, his own street as well, which is pretty cool. And so seeing the you know, city going with the mayor, you know, kind of getting that, it's almost like being with the president of the city, right? You're taking their motorcades, getting to and from places, getting to see it from a different standpoint. Has it opened your eyes to how the city is run, coming from the South Bronx, and then all of a sudden you're with the mayor, going all over the city, seeing every little nook and cranny? And
it's a great honor to like grow up on Costa Street in Hunts Point, to be standing besides the mayor on a day-to-day basis, you know, in charge of his visual representation. And it's opened my eyes completely, because not only do I see him in a much more closer, tighter human being kind of way, you know, but a lot of the people that work with him are fascinating and work really long hours. And it's really made me appreciate New York City is the biggest city, you know, in the U.S. and I don't know, the world maybe. Like it's a major influencer. So can you only imagine running it?
Sure.
And you know, that's kind of like my task every day, is just trying to keep up with his schedule.
Oh man, I can't imagine. And so you work with a team of photographers.
Correct.
Can you tell me how that's sort of broken down? Like there's you know, I know that Rob works.
There's three of us, three photographers, myself, Michael Appleton, who was a former photojournalist as well.
Right, freelancer.
You know, he shot for the Times and for the Daily News and several outlets. He won a World Press for his stuff in Katrina. Yep. Great photographer. I mean, he's part of the reason why I came to the job too, because I'm like, man, he's a badass photographer. You know, I want to work with him. And Ed Reed has been there for a long time. He's been there for 25 years, 5 mayoral ships. So he's seen New York City through many different offices of mayor. And then we have a photo editor, and that's pretty much the team. Yeah. That's pretty much the photo team.
Cool. And you guys just take shifts based off of your, you know, who's with who? Or are you basically the dedicated person that's with the mayor and the others do something different?
Yeah, so the schedule comes out, we'll look at it, we'll look at what to cover and how to cover it. You know, Appleton is very keen on knowing what needs to happen, so he'll assign stuff. Yeah. Or if I really want to shoot something, I'll say, hey, can I really shoot this? Like, it's in the Bronx, I want to do it. Right. So yeah, that's typically how it works. We'll rotate shifts. You'll shoot an event, file, pull out a laptop, kind of like you do for general assignments, working for the news. You'll file, to Flickr, for it's public. Whoever wants the photos can download them from there. So
That's cool. And also building different pieces of media for their websites and their social media and so on.
correct.
Right? So your team is responsible, for instance, that video that was made about you.
Yep.
Yeah. And you guys do some of them do video work as well?
Yeah, we have we also have another former journalist who works in video.
Okay.
Pearl Gable, she's a really good friend. We're a tight crew. She is an amazing video producer. She shoots and she edits. And part of that series that was done on me by the mayor's office was kind of trying to pay tribute to a lot of people that work within City Hall that have fascinating stories as well. I feel like the camera lenses are always obsessed with, especially the local news outlets, obsessed with the mayor and what he's doing. And but a lot of the people that work in City Hall as well for his team do incredible work. So we were doing City Hall in your borough for the Bronx, and we were like, wow, we actually have a lot of people, a lot of staff who are from the Bronx and still love the Bronx.
Right.
And have an immense dedication for it. So we were like, let's shout them out. So we did like these series of short video pieces on, the mayor's head of security details from the Bronx, Deputy Mayor Palacio is from the Bronx, the scheduler, Priska, is from the Bronx.
Representing.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
The mayor's community affairs unit, commissioners from the Bronx.
Do you think that having your background coming from the Bronx had a piece to do with you getting the job? Makes sense, I guess, a bit, but I don't know if it was all based off of your portfolio, or do you think that, I don't know.
I think that it definitely, it's a New York job.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to, in a way, New Yorkers, you're a voice within your community. And that's important. It's important to not have outsiders in a staff job that's related to serving the city of New York.
Absolutely.
So
awesome. Well, I'm curious, I guess sort of a last question is this job obviously is tied to the term of the mayor. So obviously it's not going to be something that you're going to be doing for the next 10, 20 years or something like that. Do you have thoughts of what sort of the next step might be for you going forward? Do you, after you're done with the mayoral work and everything, which I'm sure is amazing and you'll continue to do, do you want to go back to freelance, do you think? Do you like the idea of finding another staff job or staying in government in a way? Maybe working for a president one day? I don't know.
I would love to.
That'd be cool, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that would be so cool.
It's a sacrifice, though.
Yeah.
I've had Pete Souza on the podcast, and it's like he lost his life was taken away for 8 years straight.
Yep.
I mean, he's never able to do regular things, but he's having a whirlwind experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. I love it. A lot of friends are like, "Oh, you're no longer a freelancer,"
And so you can't take any freelance work now, right? Are you full-time?
I'm full-time. That's the only thing I'm doing. I've really cut back on a lot of the extra stuff besides work and family and taking pictures for myself. That's all I want to do. Hence, it's always a struggle to do a lot of other extra things.
You're in a good place then right now, I think.
Yeah, and I feel like I really dedicated to this job and just really try to make it my own. I feel like in the future, I see myself possibly, teaching.
Oh, that's a good idea,
So, I mean, Ed Reed's been there for a long time as well, so I'm not sure if it's entirely connected to the term, but I don't know. We'll see how it plays out. Either way, I think I'm going to gauge it more on what feels right for me. And
at the time,
right now, this feels awesome. It feels like a huge honor. Again, I think it's a different feeling if you're an outsider to work for the mayor's office. Then you're just like a photojournalist, a photographer covering. But for me, this is home, you know, and for me to be with him, I feel almost like this is us taking care of our backyard in a way, you know. So it's kind of cool.
And forever, your images are going to live on as a testament to the city,
right?
Which I think is super cool.
I see myself contributing to a very important archive of the city, of one of the greatest cities in New York, and I always make an effort. if I'm not covering the mayor or the first lady, I'm out shooting.
Right.
You know, I'm out shooting neighborhoods. I'm out shooting Brooklyn, Queens, like,
Right.
you know, kind of like the stuff that you see in the South Bronx. I try to do that on a day-to-day basis for the mayor's office too, for the archives. People need that needs to be there as well. So
who knows what the future then holds for that work and also your career. Well, I think we've gone through just about everything at this point. Thank you for coming on and sharing your life and career and with us all. Where can we find you on social media? What's your social media?
My Instagram's at Edwin Torres Photo. I post a lot of my South Bronx work there. Occasionally I'll post some of the mayor stuff there as well. Facebook, Edwin J. Torres, film and photography. Website is edwintorrespf.com.
PF.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Well, thanks again to Adorama, the use of their event space as always. Very kind of you to let us use this. Thank you to Canon Professional Services and Temba Bags for your support. Please do subscribe to our Facebook page and hit the little notification link so you get notified when we go live in the future. Edwin, I really appreciate you taking the time and coming on. Your work is amazing.
Thank you.
You're such a nice guy.
Thanks.
I'm looking forward to connecting more after this podcast and seeing what happens with your career.
Great.
So, anyways, take care, everyone. See you next time. Cheers.